Namaskaram to all, and we will continue our this Nidanam or Nidana Parichayam session. One more session on that topic. Chaturmukha Samarambham Vagbhadacharya Madhyamam Asmadacharya Paryandam Vande Guru Paramparam Ragadirogan Satatanushaktan Asheshakaya Prasrutan Asheshan Aulsukyamoharadidan Jakhana Yopurva Vaidyaya Namostu Tasmai. So in our Wednesday session, we were discussing about the Saptavidha Rogas, the sevenfold division of Rogas. That gives us a fairly good idea about the various types of vikaras that can happen. More specifically, in terms of the Nidanas. This is very important as far as the clinical methodology in Ayurveda is concerned. Understanding a vyadhi, a disease, based on the Nidana. And after our last session, there was a couple of questions in this regard. So I think we will see that aspect first. 2 questions were posted in the group. First question was, where can we include Purva Janma Krita Papa Janya Vyadhi in the sevenfold classification? That is an interesting question because even Vagbhada expected that question. Because in the chapter called Rogabhediya, which we are taking as the source book for this sevenfold classification, or in general the classification of vikaras. Generally, Vagbhada has got a style of explaining things. Generally, once a point is introduced or explained or taken for a elaboration, obviously there will be many types of students, many types of learners, and this description on a topic will generate some jitnasa. So the author himself will anticipate that jitnasa, and in general the next explanation will be the answer to that jitnasa, to fulfill that jitnasa. That is the general approach or some sort of a unique nature of Vagbhada in his works. So here also Vagbhada expected that sort of a jitnasa. It looks like that there was an expectation about this question, because the very next portion is going to discuss this issue. But anyway, before going to that, I think we will see what is the background of this question. The question is, where can we accommodate the Purva Janma Krita Papa Janita Vyadhi? Actually, precisely speaking, this Purva Janma Krita Papaja Vyadhi is not perfectly accommodated in the sevenfold classification. That is normal. There is no wonder in it. But before coming to that details, we will just go through some basic information. That what is a Purva Janma Krita Papam? What is Purva Janmam? All these things are very important because in the formative years, especially while we go through one textbook, we should have the background information about the author, his concepts, his postulates, his Grandhakartur Abhiprayam, Grandhakartur Abhiprayam, to which line, to which side the author is inclined. All these things are important. So when we say about Purva Janma Krita Papam, what is Papam? That is another question or another jitnasa. So Vagbhada says, Himsaste anyatha kamam paishunya parushanrude sambhinnalapam vyapadam abhidya drigviparyayam papam karmedi dashadha kayavang manasaistyajet or kayavang manasaistyajet. So different pathas. So the idea is clear. According to Vagbhada, papam is certain activities, himsaste anyatha kama paishunya parushanratam sambhinnalabam vyapadam abhidya trigviparyayam. So they are all some sort of an action deed. Whether we can say that just sinful deed, I think again it will complicate the question. What is sin? What is the definition of sin? So there can be more shades of meaning for that idea. So I will not go to that area right at this point, but the papam is somewhat defined, and it is told that it is mithya yogam of karma. And that mithya yogam of karma can have various influences in the dosha status. So here, the papam is not done by the person in this karma, in this janma. That is the importance. But it is not done by somebody else. It is done by the same person only, but the extent of execution of that karma goes backward retrospectively to the previous janma or janmas. When we say that some particular vyadhi is a karmaja vyadhi, that is also an important question. Then only we can understand. Actually, one disease is, there is a disease. Always it is like that. There is a disease, there is a vyadhi. Then we look backward. What could be the nidana? Yesterday I had an amida bhojana. Today I have a vyadhi. So when we look into the nidana of the vyadhi, what happened or manifested today, I look back and see that yesterday I had an amida bhojana. So always the search for nidana is a retrospective act. We have to go backward and look into the activities done previously, which provoked the samprapti and resulted in the manifestation of the vikara. That is the general normal procedure. But here that retrospective journey goes a little bit far till you reach the Purva Janma. It is a commonly accepted concept that there is a Purva Janma and life is not confined to this particular Janma alone. That is why Ayush is having a definition called synonym called Anubandha. It is at the same time it is Nityagaha, at the same time it is Anubandha. So there is a continuity from previous birth to this, then this to the next, like that. So here also it is the karma which is causing the vikara is in the previous janma. There is one textbook called Veerasimhavaloganam, which may be giving the Vaidya a good idea about the prospective aspects of karma. If you go through such a deed now, what is going to happen today? That gives you a futuristic view of the karmas. Veerasimhavaloganam is that sort of a work which many of the clinicians will be familiar with. In any way, Purva Janma Kritam Vikaram is Swakarmajam. So if you accept that it is Swakarmajam, at least for the sake of explanation, even though the swa goes a little bit behind, still it is considered as swapacharam. It is swapacharam. And so, if you insist on including this Purva Karmaja Vyadhi in the sevenfold classification, you can include it in the Jadaja Vikara. But even though that precisely that is not sufficient. But at this point, two things which I would like to bring to the notice, which may be clinically relevant and clinically useful, is the explanation given in the that Sharirasthana. What is that? Shuddhe Shukrartave Sattvaha Swakarma Klesha Chodidaha. Swakarma Klesha Chodidat. Swakarma Klesham is what we say as the Purva Janma Kritam. Purva Janma Kritam. Swakarma Klesha Chodidaha. So such an idea is accepted even by Vakbhada. Then in Jyotisham, you will find a similar idea, which is very famous. The first line is very famous. What is that? Purva Janma Kritam Papam Vyadhi Rupena Jayate. Purva Janma Kritam Papam Vyadhi Rupena Jayate. So the second line of that pramanam or that slogam goes like this. What is that? Tachandihi. Tachandihi means the shandi, the remedial act for that Purva Janma Krita Papam. What is that? Tachandir Aushadhaihi Danaihi Japa Homa Archanadibhihi. Japa Homa Archanadibhihi. First intervention is in terms of Aushadha, no doubt. So, Tachandir Aushadhaihi Danaihi Japa Homa Archanadibhihi. So here we find a mix of Deva Vipashraya Chikitsa as well as Yukti Vipashraya Chikitsa. So that way also it is very important when you understand that, okay, this is a Purva Janma Krita Vyadhi. I think obviously you have to look into the options of Deva Vipashraya Chikitsa as well. In one of the classifications which we are going to discuss later, we find Karmajaha and Pratyulpanna. We will come to it. The very next portion in our description about the understanding of Nidana will be going like that. Karmajaha Hedubhirvina, that sort of explanations we will find. So that was the first point to be discussed. And another question was that why the sevenfold classification was done and why that the classification stands unique. That is also an important question. The point is that classification is always an exercise done in a Shastra, which is important also. See, classification of the topic or the subject is a common practice. Sometimes we call certain use words like Krodikaranam. Krodikaranam. Krodikaranam is a common practice. What is Krodikaranam? It is the act of gathering or collecting from different places and sources and putting them together in an orderly form. That is what we call as Krodikaranam. This Krodikaranam is a regular exercise used in all Shastras, whether it is ancient or modern or whatever it is. Why? Because this gives an easiness in the understanding of the topic, which is otherwise scattered. Tebhyo adivipragirnebhyaha prayasaradarocchayaha kriyade ashtanga hridayam. So that Uchchayam, that is some sort of an organization, and then it is divided. How it is divided? Ashtavangani tasyahus chikitsayeshu samshritaha. So that gives a fairly good idea about the way in which the work is done and also brings all the information together to one point as a ready reference so that it can be used. These are not theoretical exercises. These are all meant for practical purposes. And apart from this primary use, there are many other benefits of this organizing into the groups. This is based on the Samanya Vishesha. when we are putting certain things into group, okay, these all Vyadhis are Sahaja type. There is a Samanyam behind that grouping. And when something extra comes, we understand that this is a Vishesha. So the concept of Samanya Vishesha is put into practice based on this sort of a Krodikaranam and the classification accordingly. Coming to the Sapta Vidha Roga Vibhajanam, every clinician should look into this option. Every clinician should look into this option basically, fundamentally, because it gives you some fairly good idea about the Nidana, which we have already explained in our previous session. This is a Sahaja Vikara. Fine. So that is a Nidana. But apart from that, this idea that this is a Sahaja Vikara gives the Vaidya a fairly good idea about the Sadhya Sadhyada of the Vikara, which is very important. This, you see, the biggest allegation these days about Ayurvedic Vaidyas is that they are not much bothered about the Sadhya Sadhyada. They think that anything can be done with Ayurveda sometimes, or on the other end, they think that nothing can be done with Ayurveda. So these are the two extremes at present. They are not realistic many times. So a thorough understanding about the proper sadhya sadhyada of a vikara is very important in the business between the Vaidya and the Adura, the Vyadhita. Things should be clear. We are not supposed to give or make unnecessary claims about the Vikara without a proper understanding of the Sadhya Sadhyata. So this proper understanding of the Nidana gives or empowers the Vaidya to get a clear idea about the Sadhya Sadhyata. And that way it gives some precision to the Chikitsa as well. Sahaja Rogam, for example, we mentioned about that case of Sahaja Arshas Sahajani Visheshena Ruksha Durdarshanani cha, all these explanations. At one point he specifies one idea about Sahaja Arshas and tries to generalize it, which is very important. What is that? Tatra Hedu Sahothanam Vali Bijopatapita. Vali Bijopatapita is the Hedu for Sahajanam Arshasam. Sahajanam Arshasam Heduhu Vali Bijopatapita. Tatra Hedu Sahothanam Vali Bijopatapita Arshasam. Then Bijataptistu. Why this Bijatapti happens? Mada Pitrapacharataha. Mada Pitrapacharataha. So there comes multiple factors behind the causation of that vikara. Mada Pitrapacharataha. Then another possibility is also there for Sahaja Vyadhis. What is that? Devacha. The person is destined to go through that suffering. Devacha. There are classification for Devam. It looks like a storytelling, but it is not story. These are all important factors that a Vaidya has to consider while evaluating a Vikara. These are all important. These are deeply embedded ideas in the Indian mind. So there may not be sometimes there may not be objectivity for these factors. Forget it. But all these ideas are deeply embedded in, say, maybe the multiple cultural sectors living in this desham. So this desham kalam deeply influences chittam, and chittam influences the way in which diseases are manifested. So this Mada Pitra Apacharataha Devacha. So when you hear the term Devam, don't get upset immediately. That person has gone unscientific. Don't fear like that. This is a deeply embedded idea. Whereas the other one, Mada Pitra Apacharataha, then continues. Tabhyam kopo hi sannipadasya. Tabhyam, in this case of Deva Janita or Mada Pitra Apachara Janita Sahaja Arshas, Kopam is Sannipatasya. There is Sannipadika Dosha Kopam, which reiterates one point that even though it is Sahajam, even though there is an influence of Devam, ultimately there is Dosha Kopam. It never goes beyond the understanding of Dosha eva hi sarvesham yoganam eka karanam. That is a towering statement which has got a universal application as far as the practice of Ayurveda is concerned. So, tabhyam kobo hi sannipadasya. So, multiple factors. It is sahajam. The person is born with that. Of course, there may be delay in the manifestation. There may be fast manifesting sahaja vyadis, delayed manifesting sahaja vyadis, but ultimately it is a sahaja and mada pitra apacharadaha that has caused what? Bijopatapti. And here in the case of Arshas, it is Vali Bijopatapti. It is specifically pointed towards the Vali, Gudavali. Then Sannipadasya Kopaha. Kopastu Sannipadasya. Then Tani Ataha Asadhyani. Ataha Tani Asadhyani. This should be there in the understanding about Sahaja Arshas in the minds of the physicians who are treating it. Don't think that with some tricky medicine we are going to cure this completely. Asadhyani, but Asadhya has got a twofold division. Sometimes it can be kept as a Yapya Vikara, giving good relief to the individual who is suffering. But even with the slight departure from the Pathya, there can be aggravation of symptoms. So the Vaidya should know this. So Asadhyani evama, then evamakhyadah sarve roga kulodbhavaha. Kulodbhavaha sarve rogaha evamakhyadah. So it is not, this explanation is not limited to Arshas, but this is the situation with all the diseases which can be having a Sahaja nature, Kulaja nature. Actually, these are two, there is a different division. Kulaja is one which runs in the family for many generations. That is where the element of Devam is becoming more significant. Even the other day, I had a very interesting experience. In one of the cases of an autistic child, it was a very interesting case in the sense, we will start the treatment from our experience of treating maybe a few thousands of autistic kids. And in this particular child, who is very young, the disease will respond to the chikitsa, the vyadhi will respond to the chikitsa to a very good extent. And it will show a remarkable improvement in all the symptoms, all the behavioral patterns of the child. But interestingly, once the course is tapered off and brought into a maintenance program, immediately all the symptoms will flare up. All the symptoms will flare up. Then again, we will start from the scratch, from the square one, and restart all the procedures. Then it will start responding. The child will start behaving in a normal manner or show some improvement. Immediately, again, the same thing will happen. It will go to a spiking. So just for an academic interest, I thought of looking into the Deva factor of this child. And I collected his her Jatakam and looked into that status of that Jatakam with the help of an astrologer. And interestingly, I never disclosed what is the condition, what is the presentation problem, and especially being a very small child, we looked into that Jatakam with a lot of expectations. What is going, because the life is there for many years. So interestingly, the finding was that this particular Jatagam is, or the person with this particular Jatagam is having some sort of a Deva principle in it, behind it, in the causation of the Vikara. And that Jyotishi told us that they have got a curse from the forefathers, the last 7 generations. So that runs in the Kula, not just immediately with the Mata Pitra Apacharam, which is just the own genetic or the biological father and mother, but it goes far behind to the 7 generations. So Kulaja Vigaram has got that sort of a long course of manifestation, whereas that Sahajam can be immediately originating with the biological father and mother, either alone or together. So these are all interesting findings. These are all interesting findings. So we find here that Sarve Roga Kulodbhavaha Asad Evamakyadaha. Sarve Kulodbhava Rogaha Evamakyadaha. Evamakyadaha means how it is told? Asadhyani. Asadhyam. Then at one point we will find how these things can be corrected. That also we will look into in detail. So from this point of this karmaja vikara and the importance of yes, so we were discussing about the importance of the 7-fold classification. So coming to the next, say for example, now we find sahajam. You look into any other item in this 7-fold classification. We can find, say for example, this is a kalaja vikara. Suppose we find that this is a Kalaja Vikara. So what we can do? We can understand that. So see, we have to look into the influence of the Ritu in the causation of the. So by the time that Prakopana Ritu is coming next time, we have to make a point that Ritu Shodhanam is done. So things can be relieved without much trouble. We can plan a strategy well in advance. So that gives you a good opportunity to avoid the unwanted flaring up of the condition. And you can insist on Ritu Shodhanam. Then sometimes an early onset of an Akalaja Swabhavaja Vikara, Arakshana Kritaha. Then what can you do? You can start looking into the possibility of Rasayana Chikitsa well in advance. So the 7-fold classification is one classification or one such classification of vikaras, which is somewhat accommodating almost all types of vikaras, but exceptions can be there, as we found in the case of that Purva Janma Krita Vyadhi. But still, it is somewhat an exhaustive type of disease classification, which will give you the Vaidya an opportunity to look into the Nidana more precisely, so that a better understanding about the sadhyada of the vikara and the possibility of a precise intervention is provided. So that is the advantage of this 7-fold classification, but there are exceptions which we will see in our next session. It starts like this. That means ta ete samasataha punardvividha bhavanti. Diseases can be further divided into 2-fold classification. What is that 2-fold classification? Pratyulpanna karmajaha, purva karmajaha cha. Pratyulpanna karmajaha, Purva Karmajaha cha. So this is where we find the karma done as Nidana for a particular vikara, the distance from the present life to that point of that Nidana. In Pratyulpanna Karmaja, it is very near. A retrospective journey can be immediately the previous moment, immediately the previous day, immediately the previous week, till the time of birth. Whereas Purva Karmaja breaches that limit and goes behind to the Purva Janma. So that sort of a classification of Vikara gives you a different level of understanding that operates, of principles which operate in the causation of the vikara, which is a unique nature of Ayurveda. And you need not feel bad or embarrassed to discuss all these things, because, as I told earlier, all these ideas are very deeply imprinted in the minds of Indian population, in spite of the differences between caste, creed, religion, geographical differences, seasons, all these things. So it will be good to empower the Vaidya in you to look into the vikaras in a more precise and practical way. This classification we will see in our next session, and all the possibilities of classifying the vikaras into different modalities, especially based on the Nidana, will give us a fairly good idea about understanding Nidana Vishesha, so that we can come up with a Chikitsa Vishesha or Bheshaja Vishesha. With that, we stop today. We have only half an hour in the morning. Thank you very much. We will look forward to meet you all on next Wednesday. Vishajam
Thank you, sir.
Sadhutanam Bhadram Agamasalinam Abhyasta Karmanam Bhadram Bhadram Bhadrabhilashinam.